to US President Donald Trump, who's set to unveil what's expected to be the reciprocal tariffs come 2nd of April, the most expansive set of tariffs that he'll come out with, because it's going to be called Liberation Day. Why? Because he's going to liberate the American economy from what he said were unfair tariffs that were stifling American manufacturing for decades. Now, impact of this is going to be very significant. Nations that will be targeted as Canada, Mexico, whole host of other, China, whole host of other nations, and India as well, who's actually been called tariff king in the past by US President Donald Trump in his previous administration. Before I go any further, I want to play out what President Trump said on this, and we come back and talk more about the impact this will have on the Indian economy.
I think this is going to be an amazing, I call it a lot of different names, but it's really, in a sense, it's a rebirth of a country, because how we could have afforded to do what we did, we help everybody, and they don't help us. I really, the term I like best probably is the liberation of America. It's the liberation of this country, because it's incredible. Look, we have 36 trillion in debt for a reason, and that accumulates over a long period of time. So I think what you're going to be seeing over the next couple of days will be very inspiring to a lot of people.
So what is this Liberation Day going to entail? Let's put out those big questions that we are going to try and find answers to in the broadcast. First up, are reciprocal tariffs part of Trump's economic statecraft? At the end of the day, are these just measures of give and take, that he announces tariffs, he wants something in return, and there is a midway that he finds? Next question, how will Indian industry be impacted by these higher tariffs? You're talking about very substantial amount, 20% over and above those that have been layered in earlier. Next up, another very important question, which is that fall in domestic ratings as well as dip in US consumer index. Will that temper the tariff impact? Will that force Donald Trump to probably go back on some of these announcements and find some sort of a path that is acceptable to the Americans as well? And lastly, will recent trade talks help India address these concerns? There have been trade talks. There's a possibility of a trade pact. How much of that is going to really help us cushion the impact? Let's get in an economist, a trade expert with us, as well as we have Professor Andrew Latham as well as Mr. Khan to talk more about this. Andrew, let me start with you. It's Donald Trump is trying to liberate the American economy. He said it's almost like a rebirth of a nation. I want to ask you, how much do you think he's going to come good on the 20% reciprocal tariff threat that he's announced?
Well, I think there will definitely be tariffs imposed. It's unclear yet, even at this late date, exactly what those are going to look like, whether they'll be focused on firms or sectors or countries. It's not quite clear, but there will, my judgment is there will be some tariffs imposed that will affect countries like Canada, countries like India. There's no doubt about that. They'll also affect the United States, by the way. Each one of these tariffs is the equivalent of a tax on the American people, because when you pass on the costs, obviously. I think President Trump is both confused and confusing when it comes to the rationale behind tariffs. Sometimes it's just a negotiating tactic.
Apparently, Andrew, there is buzz that, it could even be millions of tariff brackets that could be announced, slicing and dicing them. And none of that, of course, is clear right now. Even the administration is not clear as to which way it will go. Is this indicative of the fact that there is still back and forth that is happening on the tariff hike?
I think there's probably back and forth within the administration. This is not like Trump 1.0. They're mostly loyalists, but there's some pushback against tariffs. And again, he's confused about why he wants tariffs. Does he want to build a tariff wall to onshore or reshore all of these firms and farms around the world so that they all operate within the United States? Sometimes he makes those noises. Sometimes he talks about tariffs as a way of replacing the income tax.
Sure.
That can generate enough revenue to support the federal government, as it did back in 1913, when, by the way, the federal government was basically the military and the post office and nothing else. And that's not the case today. So when he refers back to some of these historical presidents and secretaries of the Treasury and whatnot, he misses the point.
Okay.
Which is that this is 2025, not 1913.
Okay, now I'm going to now talk about the India aspect as well. And let's play that graphic. Let's put that out full frame for our viewers to know the impact that we are talking industry-wise. There are, of course, several categories there. Some are going to be impacted more than others. Of course, there is the processing food sector, there is the dairy product sector, alcohol, because he's spoken at length about whiskey being a key aspect, animal products. These are areas which will be impacted very significantly. Mr. Khan, what do you think are India's options in the backdrop of this tariff impact?
Thanks. It's very clear that here is a very strong statement that the US president is making, and he is making it very deliberately and very plainly. He's saying that, look, I am going to impose tariff, and it's up to you now to respond. He realizes that there is a stake that India has in terms of its exports, particularly exports in the primary sector, which does impact a lot of small exporters from India. Therefore, the pressure will be very high on the Indian government to ensure that these sectors that are doing relatively better than others, which is, we are the world's largest meat exporter now, and therefore there will be some pressure to ensure that such high tariffs are not brought in. So India will be trying to ensure that some of those tariffs are not as high as the US wants it to be, or
there could be some possibility of negotiation. Okay, Andrew Latham, then let me ask you this, which is that, there are these Liberation Day tariffs, then there are the Venezuelan oil tariffs, then there is the Russian oil tariffs, sanctions, all layered one over the other. Do you think there is a possibility of finding some sort of a middle ground on a country-wide basis? Like, do you think trade talks for America are now going to be bilateral, where somebody gets a relief in some segment, somebody gets a relief in another segment?
Maybe. I would say a couple of things in response to that, one of which is that it's clear that the post-World War II Western liberal, now called rules-based international order, when it comes to free trade, is going out the window. It's the end of an era, I think, is one thing I would say about that. The other thing I would say is that I think Trump, in his own mind, and I try not to inhabit that space because it's scary, but I think there's a dialectic, there's a tension there. On the one hand, I think it is a negotiating tactic for him on a country-by-country, maybe even sector-by-sector basis. On the other hand, I think in his heart of hearts, he really believes that if he builds a high enough tariff wall around Fortress America, all kinds of companies, Indian companies, Canadian companies, Chinese companies even, will have to relocate their farms and their firms within Fortress America. And again, I think that bears no relationship to the economic realities. But the scary thing for me is it's the end of the post-World War II liberal era, which after the license and quota Raj in India signed up to that project. China signed up to that project. Russia for a while signed up to the project. But the project is dead.
Mr. Khan, there have been trade talks that India has held with America in recent times. There's been a lot of positive movement on some of those thorny issues. Do you expect some of these concerns on both sides to be addressed and the tariff impact to be minimized?
Yes, there have been, but there seems to be now some sort of an impasse on these issues. And over the last couple of months, one hasn't seen too much of improvement on that regard. And therefore, now it is going to be a very tough time for India particularly, because it is going to try and leverage everything that it has, especially its geographical proximity to China, its ability to be an alternative to China. That's what India really has up its sleeve. Other than that, India is certainly a problematic issue for Trump, because we do have very high tariffs on US imports in India. And that's what he's been talking about constantly.
I'm going to leave it there. Thanks, gentlemen, for joining me today on India Global. Bottom line, viewers, is that as far as these tariffs are concerned, three things are going to be very important. Point number one that I feel is that Donald Trump is now going to have negotiations on trade on a bilateral basis. It's not going to be multilateral anymore. It's going to be can he extract from India? What is it that he can best do to India in terms of exceptions? Likewise for Canada, likewise for China. That's the first thing that's going to happen. Second is Trump regime is not completely, not going to be unaffected by how things are happening in its domestic constituency. US consumer index is falling, so are his ratings. A lot of people are concerned about their job losses because of these high tariffs, and that will play out in how Trump is going to negotiate with companies and countries the world over. I guess it's going to be a middle path that he will try and find out, given the fact that next year is midterms and what he wants is a majority in the House of Republicans as well.